What's up, everybody? It's your boy Melvin here with our ghost story, and I hope everybody's doing great. The night is still young, and let's make some fright. So today's story is from the book Hollywood Haunted, a ghostly tour of filmland, written by Laurie Jacobson and Mark Wanamaker. First published in 1994, and the story is The Headless Ghost of Beverly Glen, the Lover and the Landlord. If you don't recognize the first name, Laurie actually made an appearance in the series Haunted History, which was aired from 98 to until 2000, 2001 I think, in the episode Haunted Hollywood, which I actually think the episode is actually pretty cool. I recommend it, if it's on YouTube, because there was a channel that had all the documentaries, called all the episodes of Haunted History, until YouTube, for being stupid, terminated it. Wow, it looks like YouTube doesn't want to share knowledge, huh? But yeah. But before we begin, did you subscribe? Did you hit the bell? If so, are you ready for tonight's ghost story? You better be. Let's begin, shall we? Now boarded up, a 3-story structure on North Beverly Glen, reputed to be one of the most oldest buildings in the Glen, was a roadhouse more than a century ago. Many past tenants also believe it to be the site of one of the most gruesome crimes in history. In the mid-60s, long after the row house has been converted into apartments, UCLA students Mel Scherer and Nancy Magjeski shared the top floor. 2 other tenants live on the ground floor. The middle apartment was empty. Mel and Nancy were awakened several times by the sound of footsteps running the stairs, accompanied by heavy breathing. The footsteps would stop at the door of their apartment, and suddenly the air around them would turn cold and clammy. A dark, ominous feeling would pervade the room. The frightened couple would huddle together until it dissipated. They told their neighbor, but no one downstairs had heard or felt anything unusual. Or there were no inside stairs linking the apartments. One night, Mel was upstairs with one of his neighbors. When Nancy came home on her motor scooter, she scrambled up the outside of stairs and burst into the apartment. "I saw a terrible thing," she shrieked. "It was horrible." Gasping for breath, she told them that as she parked her scooter, she had caught sight of something in her rear view mirror. Nancy turned around, but saw nothing. Yet, when she looked again in the mirror, the image was still there. She bolted upstairs. Mel was standing by the window. Did it look like a man dressed completely in yellow, with no head? "How did you know?" Nancy asked, incredulous. Mel mentioned her and the neighbor to the window. 3 stories below was a terrible sight indeed. The glowing form of a man dressed in an opera cape, all in yellow except from the black tie, stood by the side of the road. His head was gone. Our hearts started to beat fast, and was really hard had to work to calm ourselves down. Mel says we stared at it for about 15 minutes, then it disappeared. When the landlord came by the next day, he asked if an offhanded way, "By the way, has the ghost shown up yet?" From their expressions, he could tell that it had. He went on to recount the story of the headless man in yellow. Like the apartment house, the original inn has also been divided into 3 floors. On the ground floor, beyond the porch, where riders took off their gear, was the kitchen and dining room. The second floor was the main room or lobby. The top floor was made up of small bedrooms. Stairs connected all 3 floors, but they were walled in when the building was converted into apartments. Around the turn of the century, a wealthy landowner occasionally brought his attractive wife into the city for an evening at the theater. Afterwards, they would sleep at the inn. Sometimes the wife would make the journey alone. On one such trip, she was smitten by a young dandy, a man known for his outlandish style of dress and his favorite color, yellow. They began to meet regularly and always stayed at the inn. Eventually, a friend told the cuckold husband where he could find the lovers together. Grabbing a scythe, the irate man mounted his horse and rode like death across the valley to the inn. The frightened innkeeper could only point towards the third floor, charging past him. Up the stairs, the husband burst into the room, the same room Mel and Nancy slept in. As his wife screamed, he raised the blade and cut off the head of her lover. He was later executed for his murder, and the widow inherited his vast estate. Since then, the lover has been seen waiting on the road for the woman he loved. Mel and Nancy were astonished and still frightened. They felt such anger in those footsteps, the husband's presence, and wanted to make them go away. They decided to conduct an exorcism and invited several friends experienced in the occult to join them. Protected by a clove of garlic, the group shouted the key phrase, "What in God's name do you want?" Miraculously, Mel and Nancy never heard the footsteps again. In 1972, a young actress named Corinne Brosquet moved into the ground floor apartment. New tenants were on the third floor, and a photographer who worked for David Bowie lived in the middle. Gradually, Corinne became aware of the ghostly presence living with her that had a way of comforting her when she was sad. Someone who stroked her hair when a love affair was on the rocks. After learning the story of the inn, she came to believe that its presence was the spirit of the lover. It was always a warm feeling. I was never afraid, Corinne stresses. She's sure it was the lover because he acted like a lover in every way. Sometimes, when she was preparing to go out, he would hide the keys so she couldn't leave. And once, he followed her into her car as she drove down the canyon road towards Sunset Boulevard. Corinne advised the spirit to return to the inn. The city has changed. Once I leave the canyon, it will be very confusing. You might get lost and not be able to find your way back. She warned him. Instantly, he left the car and went home. Everyone in the building knew the story of the murder and had encountered the lover at one time or another. What's more, after the photographer uncovered the steps in his section of the building, everyone could hear the footsteps of the husband again. We all felt his rage, says Corinne. She also believes she heard him sobbing outside her window one night. Deep, deep sobs coming from the front porch area. I think when he first got to the inn and discovered that his wife was cheating on him, he broke down. The spirit of the wife has never been felt. In 1974, Jill Place shared Corinne's apartment for several months. Like Corinne, Jill felt quite welcome by the spirit. Not only did he stroke her hair, but sometimes climbed right into her bed, curling up next to her, cuddling close. She was never afraid of him. No one was. Today, the property is in great decline. No one has lived there for years. Weeds and vines grow wild on the grounds. No one can tell if the husband still makes his nightly charge up the stairs, and no one comes for the tender lover to comfort and hold. Forgotten and alone, the headless man may be there, still waiting by the roadside for his lady to return. Well, that was an interesting story, wasn't it? Well, there are two spirits at that old building. The murderer and the lover. And our next story is from Spain. The Haunted Bell. So, from the viewer's decision, let's begin, shall we? Everyone in the Spanish village was frightened by the bell hanging in the marketplace. It was rusty and cracked. It sounded so terrible that the bell rope was allowed to rot away. But that didn't stop it from ringing. It spooked the villagers by ringing itself. Even worse, its odious clanking meant trouble. Murders, floods, plagues, wars. Every time the bell rang. It brought forth disaster. No one dared to take it down. One man had tried, but the moment he touched the bell, they stuck to the metal. Sparks flew. He wrenched in agony until he finally managed to break free. The bell hung in the marketplace for as long as anyone could remember, but few knew its history. Those who did whispered the story behind closed doors. It all began with a cruel baron, lived in a castle high on the cliffs above the village. He ordered his blacksmith to make a special suit of armor, but he knew that the blacksmith hated him, and so did everyone else. The baron was suspicious. He didn't know if he could trust the blacksmith to fashion armor strong enough to withstand a sword's blow, nor did he trust him to make it so that rust could never take away its protective power. When the blacksmith carried the armor into the great room in the castle, the baron inspected each piece. He put on the helmet, closed its visors, peering out through the holes. Then he pulled off and thumped the chest plate with his fist. He felt the thickness of the metal plates that could cover his feet, and he saw how smoothly the metal gauntlets would flex when his hands were inside. He fingered the black plume atop the helmet and decided the armor would do. Then he dismissed the blacksmith with a wave of his hand. The blacksmith hurried from the castle, happy to escape with his life. He knew the baron would have pulled forth his sword and murdered him if there had been so much as a scratch or a dent in the shiny metal. The baron loved his new armor. He might have thought otherwise if he could have foreseen the future, but he was imagining how ferociously he could fight. Protected by the sturdy metal, he could hardly wait to get into bloody battles, but he had to gather everything he needed for going to war. That very night, he left his castle on horseback, riding down the steep road to peasants' huts. He pounded their doors. "Give me all your money," he thundered, "and I will free you from future rents." Now the peasants knew the baron never kept his promises, but most were too frightened to resist. If they argued, they lost their lives. When the baron rode off to battle the next spring, he was wearing his shiny armor. The peasants watched until he disappeared around the curve in the road. Then they hugged one another. Some cried with relief, others danced in the field. The peasants felt as if a black cloud had been lifted. They dared step outside the huts at night. No men were found hanging from the tree limbs the next morning. No maids or small children disappeared into the castle, never to be seen again. Years passed. The walls of the baron's mighty fortress were not maintained. Water leaked through holes in the roof. Some of the heavy beams began to rot. But the peasants were happy until one terrible day when the baron came riding home. It was obvious that his temper had not improved while he was away, nor had his fortune. He whipped the peasants for neglecting his castle and demanded that they pay rent for the time he was gone. If they could not pay him, he set fire to their huts, usually at night. That's when he liked to ride about the countryside, spreading terror wherever he went. The peasants appealed to the king, but the baron ignored the royal decree and killed the royal messenger. When the peasants began to revolt, the baron just laughed, but his night rides turned sour. There seemed to be a peasant hiding behind every tree, hurling rocks at him before melting away in the darkness. The baron decided to wear his armor day and night. Finally, he shut himself up in his stronghold, stationed guards at the entrance, but still he underestimated the peasants' anger. One moonless night, a band of peasants managed to scale the treacherous cliffs at the back of the castle. It was unguarded because the baron believed that no one could approach from that side. The peasants crept towards the front, waiting in the shadows until the guards fell asleep. Then they overcame the guards, set fire to the drawbridge, and threw burning torches into the castle. It was a terrifying sight. Flames leaped high, turning the great stronghold into a smoldering ruins. Many of the servants managed to flee, but the Baron was not among them. The peasants were uneasy. They wondered if the Baron could have escaped the flames. He had wondered he would be eager to kill them. No one went near the castle for days, but when the ember cooled, a few brave men made their way into the ruins. There they found the Baron, but not where they expected him. He was hanging by a charred beam in the great hall, dead, wearing his armor with his visors closed. The peasants were stunned. Did the Baron's servants find him, overcome by smoke, on the night of the fire? Did they hang him to make sure he never whipped them again? News spread quickly, but none of them thought the Baron deserved a decent burial. So he was left there for months, swinging in the wind until one wild night, a bolt of lightning flashed through the armor and knocked him to the floor. When the storm moved past, peasants were startled to see an eerie light moving through the ruined castle. It continued out the ruined stable, rising to the height of a man on a horseback. Then it came bobbling down the hill, closer and closer. The peasants rushed into their huts and bolted the doors. When they heard hoofbeats and the clank of spears, they dove into their straw beds, but nothing could protect them from the ghostly horse and rider. Once again, terror filled their nights. Huts were burned, men, women, and children disappeared. The Baron, far more cruel dead than alive. The frightened peasants were deep into the forest to ask an old hermit for advice. He told them they need garlic. Chew it, mix it with spittle, add salt if you have it. The peasants were confused. Climb into the trees, then lean over the road, and when the Baron rides by, spit on his armor, not once, not twice, but 3 times. Mark my words. The peasants were even more confused. You'll see, said the hermit. The entire family hid in trees at night, spitting down on the Baron. He didn't seem to notice, but as the peasants watched, the eerie light surrounding the armor begins to fade. The shiny metal started to rust. In a matter of weeks, the glow was gone. Then one night, the Baron slid out of his saddle and tumbled to the ground. His ghostly horse disappeared in the mist. Before he could struggle to his feet, the peasants dropped from the trees, threw chains around him. The next morning, they hauled him to court. Imagine how fearful they must have been. The judge was trembling when he asked the prisoner his name. There was no response. The judge asked again. The Baron didn't answer. The judge began to get annoyed. When the Baron refused to speak at the 3rd time, he said, "Open your visor." Still, the prisoner stood deafening but before him. Finally, a brave peasant rushed over. He pried open the Baron's visor and screamed in horror. There, inside the rusty helmet, was nothing. Absolute nothing. Yet still, the empty suit of armor was flexing its fingers and moving its feet. The judge choked out his verdict. "I order you to be hanged at dawn." But the peasants objected. That didn't kill him before. Once cried, "Take him to the blacksmith's forge. Turn it into..." And here he faltered. "A bell," said the judge. "If he's a bell, he can't do no harm." But it was almost as if the blacksmith had been sentenced as well. When he hammered the armor, it groaned, it ripped. When he thrust it into the smelting furnace, it shrieked and reached out to grab the blacksmith with fingers of hot metal. Lightning streaked out of the furnace, and thunder almost deafened him. The blacksmith thought he was losing the battle until suddenly he remembered the hermit's advice. He grabbed a clove of garlic, tossed it into his mouth, chewed on it, then he spat on the molten metal Once, twice, thrice. His spit sizzled and turned into steam, but he finally subdued the armor and made it into a bell. The bell was hung in the marketplace so the peasants could see that the dreaded armor would no longer stalk them at night. But the very first time the bell was rung, it cracked. It spit out a shower of sparks. The peasants backed away, whispering one another. Was the ghost trying to slip out the crack? Or would it haunt the bell forever? No one knows, except for the Baron, of course. Now that was an interesting story, wasn't it? I wonder if the stories were true. But we may never know. You heard of the haunted bell. How about haunted violin? And that's our next story. Titled The Haunted Violin, which was actually from Germany. So, I hope you like classical music. This will be one you will never forget. Even the magician couldn't stop the passage of time. When his long life was about to end, he asked a carpenter to make his coffin. Use wood from this tree, he said, pointing to the one that shaded his doorstep. It sprang from the ground the day I was born. Be sure to use it for my coffin, and for nothing else. For nothing else. This seemed strange to the carpenter, but he was even more surprised when the magician said, treat the wood gently. Take care not to make it cry. The carpenter couldn't imagine a tree crying, but he wanted to make a coffin, so he agreed to do exactly what the magician asked. He listened hard when he felled the tree and cut it into boards, but he heard nothing unusual. No crying, unless the wood's voice was muffled by the sound of his saw. When the old magician died, the carpenter sanded the boards for the coffin. He saw that the wood was magnificent, dark, straight-grained. It was much too lovely to bury under the dirt. The carpenter couldn't decide what to do. Should he use the wood as he pleased, or should he honor the magician's wish? In the end, he reluctantly used the wood for the coffin and delivered it in time for the magician's burial. When he returned to his workshop, the carpenter stared at the few boards that was left over. Surely the magician wouldn't want them to go to waste, he thought. They will make an excellent violin. I'll start working on it tomorrow. That night, however, the old magician burst into his dreams. Don't you dare use my wood for a violin, he said. Don't do it. The carpenter woke up. He lay there thinking for a moment, but he never paid attention to the dreams. Besides, he was tired, so he turned over and went back to sleep. The very next day, he began carving the wood. He labored over it for weeks until he had made an elegant violin, handsomely shaped and beautifully polished. He could hardly wait to hear how it sounded. But in order to play it, he had to make a bow. I'll begin first thing in the morning, he told himself. That night, the dead magician returned. Now you have done it, he told the carpenter. And it will be much worse if you make a bow. The carpenter was feeling a bit uneasy when he awoke. But again, he dismissed his dreams. He worked hard all day, shaping and varnishing the bow. But he couldn't try it out until morning, when the varnish had dried. He went to bed, and again he dreamed about the magician. The dead man was very angry. This is your last chance, he said. Do not play that violin. The next morning the carpenter felt a twinge of fear, but he knew that nothing had happened when he had finished making the violin. Why should he worry about playing it? He hurried to his workshop, strung the bow, took it down the violin, and began to play. He was not a skilled violinist, so he was astounded by the haunting melody that arose. It seemed to spring forth on its own, crying like a dirge sung at a funeral. But no sooner had he finished playing Then the room turned dark. He rushed to the window and leaned out to see if the sun had been eclipsed. But all he saw was more darkness. Suddenly, invisible hands picked him up and thrust him out of the window. The carpenter tumbled down and sank into something soft. He realized with horror that it was quicksand, sucking him into the earth. He thrashed about wildly, but it was too late. The quicksand dragged him under as he drew his last breath. When the carpenter's son entered the workshop later that morning, he found his father's body lying on the floor with the violin clutched in his hands. The son was distraught. He didn't know what happened, but that night, the same magician visited the son's dreams to tell him what has taken place. The son awoke, confused. What sort of magic was in that tree? One thing the son knew for sure, the violin was dangerous. He arose at dawn and burned it. As it went up in flames, he thought he heard a voice crying out from afar. Was the soul of the carpenter being tortured somewhere? Or was that the voice of the magician crying out from his grave? Well, I think that'll be it for tonight. I hope you enjoyed the stories I've been telling you. If you want to hear more, just leave it on the comments down below. And if you have a story you want me to tell, write down in the comments. I'll check it out. And if you're new to the channel, remember to subscribe, hit the bell, like this video. And tomorrow, on Monday, will be our regular programs on my thoughts on blank. But yeah, until then, have a great night, everyone. Stay spooky. And remember to subscribe because our main goal is to hit 1 million subscribers until December. Which, hey, we gotta make a big bang out of it, should we? But yeah, if you have any story that you want me to tell, any ghost story from your town, because most of the views I check my stats are mostly from the US or Mexico or Britain. So if you guys got a good ghost story you want me to tell, let me know in the comments down below. I'll see you next time. Have a great night, everybody. Peace.